Hello, Mervyn Cousins here, ABRSM Deputy Chief Examiner. Really delighted to talk to you about our new performance grades, a new suite of assessments based all around performance. In essence, the assessment of these performance grades is to do with the following. There are 4 pieces, individual pieces, 3 from the syllabus content and 1 own choice. And each of those is marked out of 30, actually in our normal practical grades way, out of 30 through our pitch, time, tone, shape and performance criteria, PTT Sp for short, because I'll probably mention those abbreviations later on. And there's 30 marks available for each, so that's so far a total, obviously, maximum of 120. And the remaining 30 marks will be for the performance as a whole, for which there's a new set of criteria covering communication, interpretation and delivery, 30 marks for that. So obviously that the 4 30s and that 30 add up to a maximum of 150. What we're essentially looking at for the performance as a whole is a different angle, a different lens of assessment, evaluating the totality of the performance. And in doing that, we'll be saying things and writing things that we can't really say until the performance is actually finished. We think that the best way to describe this different angle of approach is to think of it as a wide-angled lens, or even think of your Maps app and going from a higher height, a greater height, so you see the whole picture but not necessarily every single detail. In fact, we've looked at the detail already in marking the 4 pieces individually through PTT Sp. And this wide-angled lens, or sort of higher zoom if you like, has 3 perspectives: communication, interpretation and delivery. You might be thinking, how does that work for grade 1 as well as grade 8? Well, we think it's worth thinking in 3 particular ways. Communication as you, that's for the moment, you the candidate and your listener or audience. Interpretation, you and your music. And delivery, you and your instrument. So to communication, you and your listener or your audience. And of course, ultimately, the examiner is the audience, but this might be in a situation where it's a live concert situation, and that's perfectly fine, or it could just be with responsible adults in the room, or it could be just you, the candidate, playing to a microphone. So from the teacher point of view, obviously we're preparing the candidate for that experience. Communication, of course, we all know that a sense of communication is essential to a good performance. And in terms of our criteria and how we're going to mark the exams, we're looking for what extent there is a sense of musical involvement, personal conviction coming through the musical outcome. How well did you project the communication of the program, and how consistently was that managed across the performance? So to give a couple of examples how that might play out, if the candidate is playing or singing well, but is basically doing it either with head down or into the music stand, however well that's being played is not going to communicate and project quite as well as it would otherwise. There isn't that engagement with the audience, whether the audience is physically there or not. On the other hand, you've only got to think of the best performances where there's a zeal, a zest, a projection and a confidence and energy that comes through. And part of that's to do with how we control and pace a performance, how effective the sequencing of the pieces is. So the teacher, you the candidate, you've designed that menu of musical courses, if you like. You brought that to the table from the syllabus and the own choice piece. And how was it sequenced? Did it work in performance? Did you frame the pieces effectively? That quiet piece, did you allow it to settle before moving on to the next one? Those sorts of things we'll be listening out for. Was the conclusion fitting? There's no one way of finishing a program, of course, but did it have impact? Was it managed and controlled? And obviously we're looking for a sense of poise between the pieces as well. That doesn't apply to practical grades where the examiner says, please give me a few moments to finish writing, and that's completely different, but it does apply here. So that's worth thinking about. So moving on from communication to interpretation, you and your music. And this is to do with how does the candidate's understanding of the different musics that they brought come across? You might compare this to characters in a play. Did the musical characters of the 4 pieces come through? Did they have individual personalities, and were the pieces differentiated? So how effective was that across the performance? Was it consistently so? Or did they all sound the same? Because if they all sounded the same, that will have affected the performance. There's no one way of playing any of those pieces, but they need to be differentiated. And part of that is through the musical outcome, awareness and control of blending and balancing, whether the tunes were clear above the accompaniments, or if there was imitation in the pieces, did the different strands come through? And how did that play across the whole program? If we take an example of perhaps our high-grade strings, was there a differentiation between the more soloistic playing within the repertoire that was played, and on the other hand, more ensemble roles? And lastly, of the three, the C, the I, and the D, communication, interpretation, and delivery, the delivery side, you on your instrument, but across the whole performance. Did you meet the technical challenges that you brought within the syllabus regulations as your program? Was there a consistent level of delivery? For instance, did things get less successful on the highest notes? That might not have affected very much the individual pieces, but it starts to stack up a little bit across the program. It begins to bear out more. Or were you in complete control of your playing across the different pieces, across the range of the instrument, and gave a good performance through that? It's about instrument management and coping with what you might call the performance situation. It's to do with reliability and responsiveness. Thinking of a grade 1 piano, 4 minutes of piano playing at grade 1 is quite a long time. Was the playing just as good at the end as it had been on the first piece? There's a sense of sort of stamina in there. High grade brass, perhaps? How did you manage restarting after the break? You have a choice whether you have a break. Was that effectively managed? So all in all, we're weighing up strengths and weaknesses through the musical outcome across the wide-angled lens, as I called it, of communication, interpretation, and delivery for that performance as a whole, 30 marks. And the examiner will be writing things like throughout, consistently, for most of the performance, overall, only in part, unfortunately only seldom. We hope that's not going to be written very often, but it's possible if things didn't go well. Obviously, as the examiner, we will get all sorts of different performances, and we really look forward to that. And of course, those distinction ones will uplift us in an amazing way, and we look forward to that.